Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, audience, if you've been waiting, thank you for patiently waiting. We are ready to go. As I mentioned before, this is Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, coming to you live from the Nourish Festival Expo. Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio is a weekly on-air radio program based in Dallas. We are on the iHeart 1190 AM Talk Radio in Dallas, but we are all around the world via the iHeart app. The focus of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio is to connect the unbreakable relationship between the health of the planet and our health. It is about creating environmental empathy by way of talking with and exploring with ordinary people in their everyday lives how various environmental issues and impacts have a very direct effect on their health. As well, our sister publication, Natural Awakenings magazine, has been a longtime supporter and participant with the Nourish Festival and its predecessor, the Gluten and Allergen Free Expo. And so we just knew that we had to be able to come to you today to bring these two efforts and activities together. So today we have with us two of the smartest ladies I know, two of the smartest people I know in terms of the science and the health and the pharmacology of food allergies and sensitivities. So we are very, very excited to have with us Betty Murray, who is with Living Well Dallas. And I'm going to let Betty tell you a little bit more about herself. But what I've known her for 10 years, and I know that she was one of the founders of one of the food sensitivity groups here in the North Texas area. We also have with us Christie Says. Christie is a professor at our own Baylor University in Waco, and she is in the Environmental Issues Department, and I'm going to let her tell you more about that as well. So let me throw this to you two ladies really quick to introduce yourselves, and then I'll take it back and give some more background. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more, Betty?
Sure. So like Bernice said, I'm a clinical nutritionist and functional medicine certified practitioner and the CEO of Living Well Dallas Functional Medicine Center. And my specialty is really helping people with digestive disorders and autoimmune conditions navigate how to get well within their own environment. So obviously, food sensitivities, food allergies, and those things are a huge part of my practice. And within our practice, we actually have other clinicians, rheumatologists, psychiatry and internal med, plus health coaches. So we have kind of a huge practice. But this is our tribe and our community, and we understand the struggles that everybody has with food.
Thank you. And Christy, tell us a little bit more about you.
Hi, thank you, Bernice and Betty. It's wonderful to be with both of you. My name is Christie Says. I'm associate professor at Baylor University in Waco. I'm in an environmental science department, and we talk about environmental management, environmental issues, environmental ethics, and what my expertise is, which is environmental toxicology. So my research is with some graduate students and postdoctoral fellows in the research laboratory, where we conduct studies on immunotoxicological endpoints after different environmental exposures, things ranging from disinfectant byproducts that are in our drinking water to engineered nanomaterials that may be in consumer products like cleaning agents, lastly to particulate matter that's in the air and that we may breathe into our lungs.
I wanted to stop a moment and go back and dissect a phrase you used, immunotoxicology.
Well, very similar to Betty, I think we both have expertise in a field called immunology. So for my expertise, where I think about the word immunotoxicology is really that interface and that intersection between immunology, where we study allergic reactions or sensitization reactions or irritation reactions, after exposure to, in my case, a substance like a material or chemical. And then I bridge that with toxicology, where toxicology is the study of poisons. But I look at things not from a morbid point of view, but more from a adverse health outcome point of view. So we look at low dose exposures. So instead of using experimental design where we look for morbidity or death, we look at environmental exposures that are in real time, real life, what people are really exposed to, which is normally a very, very small concentration, but over a long time period across their life stage. And so that's that intersection of immunology and toxicology put together.
And I think that's very important. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because on our last week's radio show, where we were talking about air quality, it was brought to the forefront by both a doctor who's with us as well as a researcher that the sweet spot of more information lies in the amount of the environmental issue. I do want to start out by beginning to get somewhat or a better working definition of allergies, including food sensitivities and intolerances, so that we can have a good working definition or understanding of the differences in the three being food sensitivities, intolerances, and allergies. So let's start with Betty in terms of the definition of these and then how these manifest themselves.
Actually, honestly, I think it would be better if Christie would explain what the research says, and then I'll explain how in many times in the popular literature, the things that we're reading, the media, what the research says doesn't always match up with what we say. Does that sound like a good idea, Christie?
Okay, go Christie.
So one thing that we think about in the research space is that we do think of all of these terms a bit on a continuum. And we think of things along this continuum, whether you have no adverse reaction, or maybe you have a smaller reaction, which is maybe an intolerance or an irritation. And then the furthest is the allergy or maybe a sensitization. So I am less likely in the research lab to use the word allergy or allergen. I use the word irritant or sensitizer. And that's how we really kind of think of the differences among things, where it's a continuum. And at some point, you can be reversible. So for instance, if you are exposed to something and you have an irritation reaction, you can recover and you can go back to your homeostasis of being as if you were before you were ever exposed and had a bad reaction to it. However, if you go far enough on this continuum where you reach a sensitization, or the material is a sensitizer that you're exposed to, then it's almost irreversible. Not always, but a lot of the time in the literature, it becomes irreversible. So you're dealing with this allergic reaction or immunological response for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Now I'll break that down into non-geeks for everybody. So because in the popular literature, you know, the things that we're reading, social media, and a lot of these words get interchanged. They get used and intermingled. And so I have a really good analogy for everybody. So like Christie was saying, you have something that sensitizes you, right? So a sensitization is going to be obviously a big response. So think of that as the person with an allergy, that the response could be so far to anaphylaxis, right? And then the irritation could be everything from a food sensitivity where you get symptoms but is not potentially deadly, right? So if you think of your immune system as military branches, so in the United States, we have 4 military branches. Our immune system has technically 5, but we're going to focus on 3 different ones. The first one is one called an immunoglobulin E, or IgE. That is your Marines. So think about it. The Marines go in, they blow a bunch of stuff up, they do shock and awe, and they get out, right? That is your allergy response. That's the person that somebody opens a bag of peanuts on the plane and all of a sudden they can't breathe, they break out in hives. So that is something that in Christie's language has been sensitized and can be an extreme. So if you go to an allergist and they do the RAS test where they put the little stuff on your body and then poke you and see what happens, they're looking for that marine response only. Now, so for our argument and for our discussion, and when you look in the media, that we use that word allergy, allergen. Now, we have another military branch called IgG. So think of that as your army. Your IgG antibody has to deploy. So they are often delayed and dose dependent. So they're sort of lazy. They take a little bit to get going, but once they get there, they're going to be an occupying force, and they're going to go door to door, and they're looking for insurgents, right? So they're a little slower to respond, but once they do respond, they circulate for a long period of time. In classic immuno language, that's the one that remembers 10 years from now, I saw chickenpox, right? So it knows to respond, right? So if I'm making the army to foods I eat every day, basically the army is circulating around the body looking for that food constantly, right? So that would be a sensitivity. And then we have another one called IgA, immunoglobulin A. That's the Navy. It defends the wet borders of the body. So it defends the nasal passages. It's made in the saliva, the intestines, and the lungs. And it keeps anybody from storming that beach. Allergy, you're really talking about that marine response, shock and awe. And then when you're talking about sensitivities, you're talking about either an Army or a Navy response.
Exactly. And we're going to go to break now, but we will be right back after the break. And we want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other new sponsors are North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening, plant education, DIY classes, and the best Christmas trees in Texas, we're told. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body, specializing in periodontics. Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors.
Betty, let's look at, if you can, some examples of maybe typical reactions. For example, I've been tested and I show a very, very, very slight peanut allergy or sensitivity, which I knew before I was tested. I eat peanuts and I get a little bloated, and that's all that happens, but I definitely get bloated. And so that's at the very low end. Would you call that sensitivity or intolerance?
That would be more of a sensitivity.
But what do you call the other end when somebody kisses somebody who's eating peanuts and they go into anaphylactic shock or something?
That's an allergy.
Okay. So those are kind of like the bookends, so to speak.
Yes. So when we look at the symptoms someone may get, so an allergy symptom can be anything from hive reaction to nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, to anaphylaxis, to itching without a hive, swelling, like lip swelling, face swelling, those kind of things. Am I missing any, Christie?
Bloating, like me, stomach swelling.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you could have bloating, any digestive. Yeah.
Inflammation. Yeah, general inflammation, as you discussed. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So general inflammation. And then your sensitivities can have a lot of those types of symptoms too. So you can get digestive symptoms, you can get, bloating, that kind of stuff. You can get some skin outbreaks too. The difference often is in severity and speed, right? So your allergies are going to have a faster speed and usually a greater severity. And you can also have somebody that may test positive to an Army or a Navy response and maybe not have any outward noticeable symptoms. However, they are still having an inflammatory response. So the lack of symptoms doesn't mean it's not present, right? And even the severity of the symptoms doesn't necessarily always correlate to the amount of antibodies that are being made.
I guess that's what makes this whole realm of allergy so complicated and so far and wide reaching. I want to talk to clinically what actually causes these issues. That is, what makes an allergen an allergen.
I can start out by kind of bringing in the idea of what we call the physical and chemical properties or the characteristics of the substance that we're referring to, the potential allergen itself. So we're lucky that we've been doing this type of research for many, many years, for 100 years. It's always been ingrained in the field of toxicology. It's been ingrained in the field of pharmacology. So the idea of being exposed to a xenobiotic or an exogenous material, those words are synonyms for something that's foreign. It's not part of your body. Something endogenous is inside your body. Something exogenous is outside your body. So a foreign agent. And most of these allergies are, a foreign agent. But if we can measure physical and chemical properties of these different allergens or potential allergens, then we are sophisticated enough with the data to be able to model them and potentially predict if we're going to have a particular type of response. Now, physical and chemical properties vary depending on what substance you're talking about. We have solids, liquids, and gases, and all three of them could be potential allergens, or we could have a potential reaction, immunological reaction to any solid, liquids, or gases. They can be things that are in nature, such as snake venom, or it can be something man-made, such as carbon soot in air pollution. So there are physical and chemical properties that the chemistry can do in the laboratory to help put a personality profile around that chemical to help us predict what the biological response might be.
What are some examples that you've seen or that are out there right now?
Well, I'll have to go back to my tried and true engineered nanomaterials. So I've been studying things like very, very, very small particles called nanoparticles for many years. And a lot of times these very, very small particles, they're on the same size scale as some of these immunoglobulins themselves. In addition to these these different branches of the military, as Betty just told us, there are other players in that, like interleukins or interferons and different factors and proteins. Engineered nanomaterials are on the same size scale as these individual biomarkers that she mentioned. And when you have something very small like that, you often get one of the first things we look for is an allergic reaction, because there's a direct interaction between cytokines and chemokines with something really, really small like a nanoparticle.
Can you give us some examples about how people would perhaps come in contact with these nanoparticles? Give us an example that people can perhaps relate to.
So one example that's emerging right now in the literature is the idea of the microplastics in the ocean. So that's one type of exposure, is the plastics epidemic, environmental epidemic that we're facing right now. Another example would be things like liposomes or micelles are microspheres that we engineer to put in our personal care products, such as shampoos or conditioners or deodorants. And all of those nanoparticles are small enough to be able to come into penetrate through our system, either through dermal penetration or ingestion or inhalation or things like this, and can interact at that molecular level.
All right. And I want to throw this over to Betty now, because I know Betty has written an article for us. It's been many years ago, but it was about allergens or gluten in cosmetics. So Betty, would you talk to us a little bit about allergens and how they get to us?
So I want to kind of second that. So those micelles and liposomal delivery mechanisms are used pretty heavily now, even in your nutraceutical products, right? The idea being, gosh, if you can deliver a nutrient in a micelle or a nanoparticle way, the idea being that you're going to be able to absorb more of it and be able to get it where it needs to go. But again, our bodies have never seen nanoparticles before, so these are new ingredients. So when we look at our food responses, for a long time it was believed that the only way you could have A food allergy, sensitivity, or response is from the ingestion of it, from eating it, right? And what we now know is that there is a potential biological response, even to things on the skin surface. You know, definitely, obviously inhaled, like I was saying, you know, somebody opens a peanut bag on an airplane and there's enough particulate matter in the air. So the interaction at the skin, because you got to remember that our immune cells are not just a single cell hanging out in the bloodstream. They're everywhere, and they're watching for incoming pathogens and incoming things. So what you put on your body is essentially in your body anyway. Right. So, and a lot of these ingredients, particularly gluten, but there's all kinds of different ingredients that are in these other body care products and phthalates in your laundry detergent and lotion and things like that help it stick, but also permeate and end up in the body.
And I can imagine, because generally speaking, it's been my sense that people who may suffer from a pretty bad or pretty serious food sensitivity probably also have some other sensitivities or allergies. And it seems to be based around what you just spoke about, related materials or related allergens and how they are transported to the body.
Yes, the peer-reviewed literature is completely inundated with that. Remember that continuum that I mentioned before, whether you are no sensitivity, maybe you have some sensitivity, and then you have that full-blown allergy that may be irreversible. When you look at those full-blown allergies that make their way into the rodent literature, what we're talking about are the in vivo animal studies now, not necessarily clinical, but the in vivo animal studies. Those particular rodent studies show that if you reach a full-blown allergic reaction to one thing, you're way more likely to have an allergic reaction to multiple things. It's often accompanied with other allergic conditions.
I know with me personally, I have an allergy, full-blown, to mold. Okay. When I took the skin test, the welt went from one side of my wrist to the other. As a result of that, my doctor speculates that is a reason for my sensitivity to certain types of cheeses, which I love all of them.
Absolutely.
So he's told me to stay away from the soft ones, and I guess that has more mold or what have you. But the cheeses make me bloated and have indigestion. Fortunately, it doesn't get any worse. But again, I have noticed that relationship. Now, speaking of relationships, I noticed that often you see the terms allergies and asthma used together. In fact, in our first season of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio was from the National Association of Allergies and Asthma. And I just begin to notice, and you almost always hear those two words used together. So what is the correlation? Why are they used that way?
So often there's a correlation because you see similar responses from the immune system between asthma and allergy, and often asthma attacks are actually brought on by the response to the environmental allergen or potentially food that you see as well. So they tend to go hand in hand.
You're telling me that a number of food sensitivities or food allergies also cause asthma. As a young child, until I was about 12 years old, I had asthma. And it was pretty bad. There were times I had to be rushed to the hospital. It went away then, and I got older and got all these allergies. But I was not aware that asthma has a relationship or can be induced by foods.
Absolutely. And actually, so any symptom, for the most part, just about, could be caused by an immunoreaction to a food, just like it could to an airborne allergen. You know, what's interesting is I can tell you clinically, I have people that, particularly in Texas, we have terrible allergies that have suffered for lifetimes. And you test their food sensitivities, not even their allergies, right? They may have no IgE marine responses, but they have Army and Navy responses. Mm-hmm. And when you remove those reactive foods, lo and behold, their runny nose, cough, sneeze, itchy eyes, all of that goes away, right? So which one was it, the chicken or the egg? Was it the food?
So basically, as you mentioned, though, I want to summarize that asthma really is the disease and allergies are the substance that's kind of driving to that disease. This is the point for me that there is the natural leap now for us to talk about the environmental factors, environmental issues, environmental problems, environmental factors that exacerbate or how they interrelate or interact with these allergies. How do the things in our environment that are assaulting us every day in some type of way because of mostly human activity, either things we humans are doing or things we're putting into it or taking out, how do those things impact, drive, or interact with food sensitivities and food allergies?
One of the theories going on in my laboratory right now is that recognition, that observation that the number of food allergies, the diagnosis and the recognition of food allergies within a human population, within the US in particular, it's rising. And
Yes.
the cause is not really known. Mostly people kind of contribute it to reasons that follow your genes, your genetic makeup. But the other half of that is the environment we live in. One of the other observations as an environmental scientist that we notice is that we have increased urbanization going on as well. There's less rural areas and there are more urban areas. So it's an interesting, again, correlation. It's totally not at the space where it's causation, right? But there's a correlation in the increase in the amount of diseases or the amount of allergies that that individuals are, we know we are diagnosing. The methods to diagnose is better. We have more access to healthcare. You know, we do see that increase in allergies for a variety of reasons. But the other factor that's happening in the environment is increased urbanization and, of course, the change in our climates.
Betty, I want to throw this to you because you are there clinically seeing this. And you've seen it over a number of years. What are you seeing in terms of environmental contribution and to food sensitivities, and what trends are you seeing?
So I kind of want to layer a little bit on what Christie said. So if it was genetic, then people would have had these problems years ago, right? Because our genes have not changed. We do have genes that do change radically, you know, with things you eat and what you do, but the bulk of our genes that make up the way our body operates do not. So it's the genetic risk has always been present. The thing that has changed in our world is what we eat, what we come in contact with, what we produce on the planet, and how we interact with our planet. And so, you know, we look at, you know, just take it from the start of the Bronze Age. So prior to that, everything that was on the planet was organic and natural, right? So as soon as man started interacting with our environment and creating chemicals and other things, we've radically changed what's available in our environment. So I think there's a huge part of our food supply and the chemicals we put in our foods, and then the environmental chemicals and the onslaught on our body, in a body that's really a sophisticated caveman that doesn't really know how to handle that stuff. And then I think you have to look at it clinically when we're in our office, you know, as a functional medicine and a nutrition in practice, we have to dig into everything going on with the person and see if we can peel back those layers of the onion to try and figure out what are their major contributing factors, because maybe they're not all the way down the line on sensitization and they can't come in contact with it ever again, right? And maybe we can fix some of those things, reduce some of the exposures, and sort of help the immune system learn in a way that's more appropriate, so maybe they aren't so sensitive to everything. I want to say two other things. You know, one of the things is you don't see as much of this sort of response. You don't see as much autoimmunity, and you don't see as much allergy, asthma, and atopy when you get to more of a third world environment. So it is also extremely Western. So if you are a hand sanitizer outside of the land of COVID and you have to bleach everything and you're terrified of every possible germ, you're doing yourself and your children and everybody else a disservice, because our immune system is like a really poorly, badly behaved group of teenage boys. No offense to any teenage boys that may be paying attention, but when they don't have oversight and it doesn't have something constructive to do, it's going to cause problems, right? So our cleanliness and that hygiene hypothesis is also playing very heavily in here too. All of those things contribute to what we see clinically. And so that's what we try and peel back and go, what do we need to fix?
You're amazing. You're mesmerizing me with that conversation. Can you give our listeners some examples of what can happen and how it happens when we're overusing sanitizers and washing, and when we may be a germaphobe? Give us some examples maybe of things that you've seen or what could possibly happen? How can it manifest itself?
Sure. So just so everybody knows, the underlying thing is the microbes in our body, in our gut, on our skin, in every possible place in our body, help and crosstalk with the immune system. So they help control it. So when we use all these products that are antibacterial and sanitizing, what we're doing is possibly killing some bad exposures, but we're also killing off our friends, our probiotics that help our immune system balance our body. And so we're putting ourselves in a position where our immune system isn't getting the right regulation because the microbes are missing. And the antibiotic use in animal feed is also a huge problem.
It's similar to antibiotics, which my doctor talked to me almost an hour about. It's like antibiotics are killing off the things we want dead, but it's also killing off the good things. And that's why you need to take this probiotic. And so you're saying the same thing with a lot of the hand sanitizers and all the bleach and all that stuff. It's killing off those germs that we are so afraid of, but it's also killing off the good things that help us fight germs.
Right.
Well, and there's another soundbite here. You know, I really firmly believe that there's a misunderstanding in society that by completely avoiding and not introducing a potential allergen to an infant or child, that then if you don't introduce it, then they won't develop the allergy. And that's a complete misconception and not true at all.
I think that's been on display lately with regards to the peanut allergy, you know, where they're coming out with the fact you need to give them some peanuts.
Right.
I wish that were the case with my mold allergies.
Well, mold is changing. I think that this is a case where you have an allergen where its composition changes in different situations of your environment. So the molds that you might have been exposed to as an infant is largely different in composition than the mold that you're exposed to now as a grown woman in your own house.
Thank you, ladies. You have just really made us all smarter. But going back to the connection with environmental factors, and it makes me wonder, perhaps have some of our usual suspect allergens become more potent, or as you mentioned about mold, have they mutated? For example, milk, dairy is a common allergen. I have to think that milk has changed over time. Probably the milk I had when I was a child, like 200 years ago, may be different than the dairy now because of other environmental factors affecting the cows, the grass they eat, the feed they eat, the shots they take. Talk to us a little bit about that, such that may be making the allergens more potent. And the other side of that, then, perhaps have the environmental factors created more fertile host, i.e. changed us. And I believe y'all might call that, is that microbiome? Is that what I'm referring to? Has the microbiome changed?
It's your microbiome, but it's also things such as our BMI. You know, it's also things such as how much fat do we carry around now versus how much population carried around previously.
Right. We got to remember most of our toxins and things are lipophilic, meaning fat loving. And so when we're exposed to environmental chemicals and things like that, it gets housed and stored in our body fat. So even when they've done studies looking at someone losing weight, toxins in the bloodstream increase as they lose weight because it's getting dumped out of the fat cell. You know, but I want to circle back to Bernice's earlier question. So, you know, there's my friend Robin O'Brien said this: is it our food, or is it what we've done to our food?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
you know,
that's where the environment comes in. Yes.
Right. You know, because at the end of the day, the food itself looks the same, but it is quite different than what it was 20, 30, 50 years ago. Like we were talking the other day, and I said, I remember taking a peanut butter sandwich to school. You know, I everybody did when I was a kid, and that's, you know, aging myself quite a bit. So we know that we've done genetic modification of foods, which basically they've altered the proteins. I won't go through the chemical reactions there, it's too much, but it alters the proteins inside the food. And those protein strings are what our immune system, those antibodies, recognize as foreign or not. And so genetically modified foods, we've done things like with the wheat family of foods, you know, we've taken those foods and we condition the flour in the United States to alter the flour to distribute differently when we bake it. So we make like the Wonder Bread sort of experience that makes it way more allergenistic and alters the chemical structure of the food. I think it was Cornell, did a really good research study on that. So the food itself has changed radically. And then the other big thing is we've added an extraordinary amount of chemicals to our food to enhance flavor and stability and shelf life, which all of those are interacting not only with the food, but also with our immune system. So the Kraft macaroni and cheese I ate when I was 8 years old may look the same with the same electric orange stuff, but it is radically different than the one that's available on the shelf today, right? So all of those things have made those foods more immune stimulating to us, and so therefore now we're paying the price of it.
And I think that pinpoints probably one of the most prominent ways or causations of environmental influence on food sensitivities.
We'll be right back on the other side of the break. Thank you. And thank you, sponsors. And we want to give a shout out to those sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, as well as many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other new sponsors are North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, DIY classes, and we're told the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our last sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors.
I'm realizing how critical and potent vitamin D is to our lives because I've had a number of friends and relatives with various issues, heart issues, cancers. And what was amazing to me is doctors informed 3 different people with different critical issues like that they needed more vitamin D.
Yeah, vitamin D in our body is a pro-hormone. Think of it this way. Every single cell, the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of cells you have in your body, all have a keyhole for vitamin D to click in. So vitamin D at the very basics of your immune system is like a crossing guard. It's giving instructions, and when you don't have it there, your immune system doesn't get the right regulatory message. So, and humans can only get vitamin D through synthesizing it through sun exposure, supplementation, whether it's in the food and added to foods or taken as a supplement, period. We can't manufacture it without the sun exposure, without sunscreen.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And yet, when I put on the titanium dioxide sunscreen,
you're not getting it.
I'm not getting it. I high dose vitamin D because I'm just constantly doing sunscreen.
And depending on pigment color too, if you're darker skinned, you have a harder time synthesizing it.
But see, I need to put a note on the boxes of all sunscreen. This may hinder your absorption of vitamin D. Please be sure to supplement.
Right.
Let me ask you though, we are seeing, and we talked about this a little bit, the rise of allergies with the rise in climate change. And so I want both of you all to address this. A lot of it is kind of out there, but what are you seeing in your practice, Betty, as we keep hearing the drumbeat of climate change marching on, marching on, marching on? Are you seeing trends in your practice regarding significant upticks in folks with various allergies? And can you surmise any correlation?
Right. So definitely we do see that. And you know, part of it is we're a great host because we take too many medications, and we've done things like take proton pump inhibitors that might make us more prone to that. But I can tell you, just looking at the last few years in the Dallas area, our weather has become warmer, wetter, very, very mild winters. So a lot of the normal seasonality that causes plants to die off and to alter the plants, we see a change in our environment. And so all of our environmental allergens have an uptick, right? So we see that. So if you look at the global climate change and the overall warming of the planet, the loss of the sea ice, and then the increase in water levels and all of those things, you're going to see more pollen produced in particular areas. You're going to see changes to the environment in those areas, and obviously probably more allergy responses. The other thing is, if you even look at viruses like something like COVID and things like that, these things are born out of environments where you have warmer environments, you've got more tropical environments, and you have more potential to cross over from one animal to the other, right? So global climate change has an impact across the board to things that threaten our immunity.
Since October of 2019, when we started Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, we've been told by researchers and scientists that something like COVID is coming. Yeah. And particularly, we were warned in, I think it was November or December, when our subject that month was extreme weather events. And they were laying out for us and connecting the dots for us how flooding, heat, what have you, either allow things to flourish in the environment or they don't allow things to flourish in the environment that allow other things to take root, like COVID. So when I heard that, I was not surprised at all. Let me ask you this, as our time begins to wind down a little bit, let's talk age groups a little bit in terms of what are the age groups with the most allergies. And I've typically have been told that that's children. So are we seeing any trend differences in that?
So I mean, I can speak from a clinical standpoint.
Yeah,
I personally see adults. So I don't have direct responsibility for children. I would say historically, allergies were a childhood problem that may or may not persist into adulthood. But that is not truly the case that we see right now. We see both increase in childhood allergies and food sensitivities and environmental allergies, but we also see them throughout the lifespan, right, in adulthood. And that is a fairly new phenomenon, right, and that we haven't seen before. And I think a lot of it comes down to, especially in the adult population, it's the use of it's all the things that we've talked about, the things that have altered our microbiome and our immune system, where it is no longer self-regulating properly. And that's what we see. I'm sure the literature might bear out to something else, but I definitely see it for sure.
With food allergy in particular, it's really, people cite the fact that it's more prevalent or more talked about in children, but really it's between 4 and 6% of humans, whether you're a child or an adult, that would have a food allergy. So there's really no different. But I think, Betty, you're onto something there. If you have the food allergy or any type of allergy as a child, it's because you've never been exposed to it before. However, if you have the onset of allergy and as an adult, it's because of these environmental factors that we've been talking about all hour, and our microenvironment as an individual, as an adult in that microenvironment is completely filled with co-founding variables, a lot more than what you would have been in your microenvironment as an infant.
Yes.
What is, or is there a relationship, or what is the intersection of COVID with food allergies and food sensitivities, or is there not? What is the impact? Because that, of course, dominates all our lives right now. COVID does. So how is that overlaying with food allergies and food sensitivities?
I haven't really seen anything directly in the literature pointing out, I would say some of the interesting things about COVID is the bradykinin, which is kind of the part of the cytokine storm that seems to be happening. The people that are at greatest risk are people that are hypertensive with morbidities like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So this particular virus has some interesting behaviors because it tends to be more deadly in those individuals. Of course, anybody that's immunocompromised might have some conditional response that COVID may be more damaging. We don't necessarily see that people that have, like, let's say, autoimmune conditions and or allergies, I haven't seen necessarily a lot of research saying that they're at a significantly greater risk. Have you seen that, Christie?
I have not. The closest, I agree that I think our standard answer for this is more research is needed,
Totally.
and we ought to continue to put forth these research papers in rapid publication to get the information out. The closest thing that I could cite would be that relation between your respiratory health and how you can get over COVID, or how you could recover from COVID or the flu or the common cold or a pneumonia. So I think that in general, it boils down for me is if you have healthy respiratory system and your respiratory health is spot on, then there is some sort of relationship there for how your body could handle processing the COVID virus through your body.
Yeah, a friend of mine was telling me that her 88-year-old aunt had COVID, did not know it until her grandson told her he had it. The 88-year-old was asymptomatic.
Yes.
The grandson was not. But I think I hear you saying too that in many cases, folks with sensitivities may have some immune system or respiratory compromise.
Exactly.
And that may be where there's an overlay.
Could be.
Yeah, often they just show up together. Somebody that has sensitivities often has, if you have food sensitivities or environmental allergies, you're more likely to have the other one, period.
Yes.
Back and forth. Yeah. So you're more likely to be compromised.
And if you're in an inflamed state, then you are immunocompromised during that time period. So if you were exposed to a virus at that time, it would have other consequences.
Again, that's why we think in Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio that it's so very important for people to be aware of environmental influences on their health. It is all around them.
Thank you so much for helping us unpack this today. This has been very informative. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts by billions of people every day like yourself. And each of these tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you, and listen in again next week for more Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Thank you.